Boom. How's everybody doing over there in the internet world? We're going live. Just if you're on YouTube or if you're on Instagram or if you're on TikTok, we are live because I just posted a brand new video. It is called UFO Landing, the alien encounter that shook the government. If you haven't seen it yet, hopefully you can go to YouTube and watch it real quick. But what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start going live every time we post a video. So that means right now, because I posted the video yesterday, we're going live today. So I'm going to hang out here for the next couple of hours. I want to engage with the audience on every platform. Whether you're on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. The replay of this will be going on YouTube because it's going to be a little bit of a nicer, cleaner version of this live stream. But any comments that you guys have, any questions that you guys have, I'm happy to answer them here in real time. Now, that said, if you watch the video, you may remember that there was one person in particular who we kind of highlighted because they're kind of an expert on this case, and that guy's name is James Fox. Now, if you don't know who James Fox is, he's the director of The Phenomenon, Moment of Contact, and Out of the Blue, three of my favorite UFO documentaries, because it really shows a lot of like never before seen footage, a lot of never before seen interviews, things like that. And I got some good news. I have connected with James Fox privately, and he is down to come on and do like an actual interview soon. So be on the lookout for that. And also let me know if you know of him. Is there anything else that you would want me to ask him about other than if it wasn't just about the Socorro, New Mexico case? But if you have seen the video, part of the reason I'm so excited about James Fox, the Socorro case, is because I was literally listening to James Fox on Joe Rogan's podcast not that long ago. And Joe Rogan himself, or they were talking about it, but he said to Joe Rogan, this is the case that flipped around J. Allen Hynek from UFO debunker to UFO believer. Now, what's crazy is there was a guy in the comment on YouTube today who was like debating about like, oh, this is not the best, most well-documented case of close encounters of the third kind in U.S. history, like I claim in the video. But that guy's wrong, because the truth of the matter is James Fox actually interviewed not only Lonnie Zamora's wife, the police officer who saw these two beings and this craft land in the desert in broad daylight. Not only did he interview her, but he interviewed basically a lot of the people in town. He interviewed the ex-boss of Lonnie Zamora, as well as anybody else who he could track down, obviously in recent day, because this happened in the 1960s. But you know, he actually went through all of J. Allen Hynek's files. He also interviewed Jacques Vallée, who was like the right-hand man to J. Allen Hynek, and actually a character in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind was based off of Jacques Vallée, right? So Jacques Vallée definitely knows what he's talking about. And there's James Fox has been on Joe Rogan's podcast multiple times, but one of the times he went on with Jacques Vallée, just two of them with Joe Rogan. And Jacques Vallée said, yeah, before this case, you know, they had investigated sightings, you know, someone sees something in the sky. They'd also gone to sightings where maybe something landed and it made an impression on like the animals nearby, or maybe it left some marks on the ground. That would be a close encounter of the second kind, is if there's actual evidence of something happening in the environment. But J. Allen Hynek, who was like the face of Project Blue Book, he wasn't the head of it, but he was the face of it. He was the lead investigator for it. He said himself that you know, J. Allen Hynek was very skeptical that close encounters of the third kind were even real. He was skeptical of the entire phenomenon altogether, because up until that point, there hadn't been a well-recorded, well-documented case of a close encounter of the third kind, which, if you don't know what that means, basically the first kind is someone sees something in the sky. A close encounter of the second kind is obviously, like I said, it interacts with the environment somehow. Maybe there's radiation, maybe there's impression marks left on the ground, maybe there's burn marks left on the ground, something like that. Well, a close encounter of the third kind is when beings are actually witnessed outside of the UFO, or even inside of the UFO. Beings in general are witnessed along with the craft. So this one being that it was in the 1960s while Project Blue Book was still going on. Basically, they, you know, once he started researching this case and they went to Socorro, New Mexico, and J. Allen Hynek had the chance to try to debunk this by going through every possible theory. He simply could not, because no theory held up the weight of the evidence that was available. That is the eyewitness testimony, all the impression marks left on the ground, things like that, etc. And even there were metal shavings that they found, which one set of the metal shavings was sent to NASA. NASA claims that they were crazy, but they destroyed the shavings in the process of examining them, which is kind of bullshit. And then the other metal shaving was dropped in the grass somewhere by a guy who actually was investigating on the scene. So they lost that, right? So close encounter of the third kind, Lonnie Zamora saw the beings, and it was kind of like almost like a religious experience. If you remember from the video, basically there's a quote of Lonnie Zamora where he's like, someone asked him, do you believe that these were aliens from outer space? And he said to the guy, and this is like the day after, he goes, I don't know if it was a UFO from outer space. I doubt it, because I don't even believe in those types of things. So even the guy who witnessed it, the key witness, the police officer, was not one to jump to conclusions and automatically conclude that it was beings from outer space. And that in itself actually proves that this wasn't necessarily a hoax being perpetrated by the guy who witnessed it, because if it was a hoax, he would have done a lot more effort to perpetrate the hoax, which he did not, right? So if you haven't seen the video, hop over to YouTube and watch that real quick, or after this live stream. But I want to answer any questions that you guys have, or discuss any conspiracies, theories, anything that you guys want to talk about. I am down for that today on this live stream. So Roman around on YouTube says he's waiting around. He's not only roaming around, but he's waiting around. Heather Jackson, hey, what's up? Looks like I'm live on Instagram, but we keep having connection issues. So if you're on Instagram, hop over to either TikTok or YouTube. YouTube's obviously the main platform with the nicer camera, things like that. So hop over to YouTube if you're on Instagram and the connection is poor for you, if you want to hang out with us on this live stream. But what did you guys think about the video? Do you guys like alien videos? What do you guys think about this topic? Have you done any research into it on your own? I had another guy in the comment on the video. He was talking about how, why is it that most of these sightings never happen in the, in modern day? It's always seems like they're in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And honestly, I used to think that too, just because, oh, we got a guy coming in from Scotland. Rob Jones, what's up, man? With with this case, this one was obviously in the 60s, but I used to think that, okay, a lot of these sightings happened decades and decades ago. Maybe it was just, people putting on hoaxes or seeing things that they couldn't explain, but it might have been secret technology. Well, today, I can tell you that after researching more, the more I look into it, the more I find very significant sightings happening, in later decades, even all the way up until modern day. I mean, if we just talk about like the 70s, for example, the one that stands out to me for the 70s is the Travis Walton case. How many guys know about that one? Another one from the 90s, which was during my lifetime, was the Virginia Brazil case. So if you've seen James Fox's documentary Moment of Contact, that was all about that case. And that one, not only was there a crashed UFO, kind of like Roswell, but there were beings found inside of the UFO that were very alien. And even witnesses in the town saw these beings. They were running around for a couple of days because, put yourself in the shoes of an alien being if you could. If you crash landed on a planet that was not yours, knowing that there were other intelligent life forms, aka humans, you would probably do your best to try to avoid either being seen or being caught, any of those things. And you also got to imagine that maybe there's pathogens or bacterial infections or viral infections that someone who's never been exposed to Earth would be afraid to catch just by walking around without some type of a suit on or something like that, right? And I'm just guessing, right? But what's funny about the case from Virginia, Brazil, is one of the officers saw this little alien being running across the road. He was with two other officers in a car. They stop the car. One of them gets out of the car, grabs the alien being, brings it back to the car, and then they take it to a hospital somewhere to be investigated. This is all documented. Go and check out James Fox's documentary, Moment of Contact, if you want more information, interviews, and things like that on the Virginia, Brazil case. But the officer who actually grabbed this thing a couple weeks later died from a very, very aggressive bacterial infection, which doctors could not even identify because it was unlike anything that they had ever seen as far as the bacterial infection goes. So, I mean, that just goes to show that not only are these types of encounters happening, way back when in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but also they're still happening to this day. And I think in probably the last 20 years, if it happened, it would be very hard for us to find out about it because the veil of secrecy that has been perpetrated by the government ever since the introduction of the military industrial complex at the end of President Eisenhower's tenure as president, I would assume that they are very good at keeping things a secret that they want to keep a secret at this point. And, we can debate about that all day long, but the fact of the matter is, these things have been happening for the last 70 years. They're still happening to this day, and new evidence is coming to light every single day by the thousands and thousands of people looking into documents, research, interviewing people, things like that, right? And on the other aspect of that, I would say that the more interesting question to me to ask is, why are not more of these things happening today? No, I think that's less interesting than asking, why did they start happening around the 1940s? And I attempted to possibly answer that question in another video that I released right before this last one yesterday, where we talked about the UFO, alien, and nuclear bomb connection. If you don't know much about that, nuclear bombs obviously were invented by the not necessarily exactly by the U.S. specifically. I think the U.S. developed a fully functioning nuclear bomb first and used it first. But, when it comes to quantum physics and how, when you're thinking about nuclear, that is on the size level of quantum, right? So there's a lot of funky things that happen when you deal with nuclear physics that even to this day still can't be explained. Nuclear physics is essentially like magic. Not nuclear physics. Quantum physics. The word escaped me for a second. So quantum physics is very almost magical, mystifying, because there's so much we can't necessarily explain, or there's so much that we haven't even learned about it yet. And so one of the theories was that when you set off a nuclear bomb, it not only affects the physical reality that we experience, but it could also completely damage, other neighboring dimensions, maybe other parallel universes. Who the fuck knows? It's just a guess at this point, but that could be one specific reason why there was a massive uptick in UFO sightings starting around the World War II era, in the end of World War II, so the mid 1940s. Roman, I got to go get my old lady a sub sandwich. Back in a few. See you in a few, Roman. Ask if the guy knows Nuremberg 1561. I don't even know about that one, so I will make note of that one right now. I have a whole document of questions that I'll ask James Fox when we do eventually connect. Let me see. Nuremberg. I'm just going to make that note right here. Boom, boom. Nuremberg 1561. If you have any information about that, Rob Jones on YouTube, let me know a little bit more information about that. Was that kind of similar to what Christopher Columbus claims he saw in the ocean, the fancy lights or whatever? Because I'm guessing that's maybe around the same time frame. But one other one that goes back to the 1800s that really does fascinate me is the mysterious wave of airships that we're seeing hovering over cities with like giant spotlights and stuff. And they look like wooden ships floating in the sky. That goes back to the 1800s. That one fascinates me. I'll be honest, especially for the research of some of these videos, I've seen a lot of, I guess, just conflicting theories, podcasts with James Fox and other experts, etc. When I say expert, I mean, how can you necessarily claim you're an expert on UFOs unless you have all the data available to you? But I would consider expert in this case someone who actively researches this stuff every day, goes out and tries to investigate these sightings or stories, and actually tries to track down people and documents. I don't even know that I would consider myself an expert. I'm just a guy who makes YouTube videos, but James Fox has definitely dedicated his life to this at this point. So I'll definitely ask him. But one of the things that really kind of intrigued me was I remember seeing somewhere that James Fox was talking about how, they didn't really, he doesn't even necessarily look into some other popular stories like Bob Lazar as an example. He even told Joe Rogan that, Joe might know more about Bob Lazar than he does. I think James Fox tends to go deep on the stories that fascinate him. And I know, just because I've been following him on social media for a little bit, that right now he's actively working on a new documentary about some of the recent congressional hearings around UFOs. So I'll be interested to question him about that. But one of the reasons why I really wanted to get him on for you guys was, he said that this case is so fascinating and so mind-boggling that he could talk about it for 3 hours straight. So when I reached out to him, I was like, I want to take you up on that. Let's talk about this and go as deep down this rabbit hole as humanly possible. But when I get him in person or, virtually, whatever it is, I'll be able to ask him basically whatever you guys want me to. Also, let me know, should I go live for that interview? That might also be interesting. That way you guys can ask questions in real time too. Let me know if that sounds appealing to you. If not, what I think might even be better just as far as presenting content is hopefully maybe even trying to link up in person with him and filming it so we can actually put out some what I would consider to be higher quality content than like a Zoom interview. But at the same time, Zoom interviews, I watch a ton of them on the internet anyways myself. So that's more of a personal choice. But I guess I just wanted to put this out there that hopefully that'll happen relatively soon. Heather, Jessen, government tech, interdimensional beings. I think it's a mix of both. I think it's a mix of both too. I also think that, I asked when we talk about interdimensional, I asked a guy named Michael Schratt. I posted his interview on the YouTube channel, the full one, uncut. And Michael Schratt, if you don't know that name, he's not necessarily the biggest person in the space. He has been featured on a lot of documentaries and stuff. But one of the things that really intrigued me about his take on a lot of these sightings is that he thinks most of these are man-made. And he tries actively to debunk a lot of these as not being interdimensional or alien, but tries to actually point out evidence why it might be man-made. One of the things that fascinated me about that interview or conversation with Michael Stratt was he mentioned the Socorro case in particular, specifically, and he's convinced it was a man-made craft, secret test technology that the government has. Maybe, who knows? But I know that line of thinking specifically was one that J. Allen Hynek himself looked into, and they actually found that it wasn't. If it was, would they even tell us? I mean, I think that's up for debate. But something that intrigued me about Michael Stratt is I even asked him towards the end of that conversation, like, okay, so do you think that none of these are alien and all of them are man-made? And if I recall correctly, he said that he believes there's interdimensional aspect to this. So I think that's pretty fascinating, arguably more fascinating than the aspect of interplanetary or intergalactic if they were interdimensional. And he also said that he thinks a lot of them could be what he called ultra terrestrial, which just means an advanced species of intelligent beings that are living on Earth that maybe we are unaware of. So maybe in a neighboring dimension. So there's an interdimensional aspect. Or if you really want to go deep down the rabbit hole, and if you tend to believe in this line of thinking, but hollow Earth or like inner Earth, I know that's a big thing too. Maybe I'll do a video on that in the future. But even like under the ocean, we know more about space than we know about the deep ocean. So if there were advanced beings that hypothetically were here tens of thousands of years ago that maybe built the pyramids, maybe built the Sphinx, maybe built Göbekli Tepe, maybe built Atlantis, it's very feasible that if they had that advanced technology that they could move their entire society under the ocean and we would never know about them. So he thinks that there's an ultra terrestrial, which is already on Earth aspect. And he thinks that there's also an interdimensional aspect. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I actually asked him, why do you think interdimensional? Explain that concept to me. And he was talking about high strangeness in the sense of things that even our own laws of physics couldn't explain. And probably the most, obvious answer would be that it has to be interdimensional. Like some of these things are popping into and out of, or just like dissolving into thin air and then reappearing into thin air. So that could be advanced cloaking technology, or they could be phasing into a neighboring dimension, which even that topic in itself kind of blows my mind because I don't even know necessarily if I can wrap my head around what another neighboring dimension would even be like. But David Grush, he even mentioned interdimensional in his interviews, and he even said that theoretically, I guess he's a physicist, theoretically you could phase shift into an alternate dimension, which I'm assuming might look similar to ours, but just maybe on a different frequency of the universe or something. I have no idea. We're just speculating at this point, but it's very fascinating and obviously worth looking into. That said, there's also a lot of debate on, what do you even think about, David Grush in particular. I think a lot of people, myself included, are relatively, I would say, have a healthy level of skepticism for any of the claims that, David Grush has been making. Anyways, let's look at this. Joey, there's literally so much shit. Heather, yes, inner Earth and the ocean theories are really interesting and terrifying. I agree. By the way, if you're on Instagram or TikTok, go and check out the new YouTube video about the UFO landing case that flipped J. Allen Hynek from UFO debunker to UFO believer. There's a lot of just compelling evidence that was impossible to debunk, which led J. Allen Hynek himself to eventually flip out his viewpoint on this whole phenomenon in general. But also a couple of years after that, Blue Book was disbanded. It was discontinued. Then Hynek went on to create his own I guess, group that wasn't necessarily government funded for researching UFO sightings, landings, etc. And then he released a book where he, in 1975, so like a decade after, where he actually kind of just talked about how Project Blue Book did try to actively debunk a lot of these sightings themselves. And then he came out with his own personal thoughts on this. And, if you look up the book and you kind of look up the section that he has about the Socorro, New Mexico landing, he said himself, whatever this was remains unknown after looking into all the theories. And you would almost at that point have to accept the story that Lonnie Zamora, the guy who witnessed it, is saying at face value, because I mean that's all the evidence points to that being the case, if that makes sense. Kevin, your JFK angle video got me thinking. That one really got me thinking too. And I think that one in particular, if you want to accept that as the theory for why JFK was taken out, one, you have to believe in the legitimacy of the leaked documents that came out regarding Marilyn Monroe, who was assassinated shortly, not too long before, but there was a document that came out right before, like 3 days before Marilyn Monroe died, where she was going to hold a tell-all press conference revealing everything she knew about these beings from outer space that JFK had been telling her about in these pillow talk conversations when they were having an affair. And so a lot of people point to that as evidence that, she was taking out to preserve the secrecy of this thing. And if they're willing to take out one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, obviously you would hope that there's a very important reason for that. And then secondly, you got to believe the legitimacy of the burned memo, which it's now been called, which is a series of leaked documents that were supposed to be burned in a fire with a bunch of other documents. And then the guy who was throwing them in the fire realized what these were, where they were actually confirming that JFK wanted to release UFO secrets to the Russians so that way they didn't confuse UFOs for nuclear bombs from the US and accidentally start World War III. And then 10 days later, he was assassinated. So it's circumstantial evidence at best. It's not directly correlating necessarily, but very intriguing timeline of when these documents were created, the content inside of those documents, and the the timely deaths of both Marilyn Monroe and JFK. But as you mentioned, very compelling, I guess, line of thinking. I guess like a very compelling conspiracy behind the JFK assassination. I believe if those documents are legit, then you got to believe that he was taken out for that reason, among a multitude of other reasons, like, not wanting to go to Vietnam. But I think the big one, especially since it was in the height of the Cold War, was they probably didn't want to release all the UFO data we had to the Russians, who, are kind of the enemy, I guess you could say. The Joker. This show is out of this world, quite literally. Alan, no kidding. I live in New Mexico and I've seen a UFO back when I was a U.S. Air Force pilot. Wow. I would love to hear about that experience if you're willing to share more. Kevin Nicholas, pillow talk at its best. Yeah, I mean, you also got to wonder, the personality of the people doing the pillow talk. I mean, just because it's pillow talk doesn't necessarily make it truthful. I'm sure a lot of guys have said a lot of things to try to get laid or impress women. If I were the president, I'm sure that I don't know that I would necessarily put it beyond me to be like, hey girl, you want to see some crazy shit? And try to impress some girls or something. But yeah, man, I mean, pillow talk, again, not necessarily the most damning evidence in a court of law. But as we've seen with O.J. Simpson, circumstantial evidence can get you off the hook. So I guess it's up to the people investigating and the people looking at the evidence to make their own conclusions. And to be honest, now that we're talking about it, I mean, that's one of the things I've always strived for is I want to gather the intriguing parts of the story that I found interesting and I find mind-blowing, then go deeper on the story, find whatever evidence I can, and present it to you guys in hopefully an as unbiased way as possible. That way you guys can draw your own conclusions. I guess the only bias would be like, what do you include and not include in the video? Honestly, the only thing that dictates what I include and don't include in videos is it interesting enough that I think other people would find it interesting? If it's not interesting, or if it's not a key aspect of the story, usually it ends up getting cut out of the video. I mean, as an example, with this last video I posted, the Socorro, New Mexico case, I didn't post necessarily every single theory or every single piece of evidence, but I posted the key ones, right? And so if you wanted to go deeper, that's where we can go deeper on these live streams, or, you know, you now have enough information yourself to start looking into it yourself. And honestly, man, I think the more people who are talking about it, the more people who are looking into it, the better. You know, if you went on, for an example, and made your own video with your own perspectives on the Socorro, New Mexico case, and as an example, that would only help, because now it helps us get to the bottom of what may or may not have happened. You know, and I think the more people talking about it, the better. As an example, TikTok, I posted a video months ago where I was covering like the Antarctica UFOs and Operation High Jump and things like that. And in that story, one of the government officials, who was like the first ever Secretary of Defense for the United States, he was committed to a psych ward against his will, because they feared that he might reveal secrets that they didn't want to be revealed. When I say they, I mean forces within the military industrial complex or the government. And then he was mysteriously suicided by being thrown out of the 16th floor of the psych ward. Now, here's what's crazy. I hear about this story years ago. I eventually decide to start a YouTube channel, and then eventually decide to go deep down that rabbit hole and put out my own video about it. And one of the people who saw that video and then commented on the video on TikTok was a nurse who works at the psych ward, which is a military hospital, for the building that this guy was thrown out of. And she said in the comments, wow, that's crazy. I had heard about that, but I didn't know the details of it. And she goes, if he actually jumped out of the window, there's no reason he should have been on the 16th floor of the window where he was thrown out of. Like, that was a window that would have been closed off to him, right? So that's new evidence that came forward just because I decided to make a video about it, right? And so the more people talking about it, and the more people looking into it, the better, because more evidence like that comes to light, which makes it even more compelling that stuff like that happened, right? So, you know, I actually pinned that comment on that video that she commented on, and she actually deleted her comment, unfortunately, probably because because she didn't want to draw unwanted attention on herself. I'm only assuming. All right, Rob Jones. I see Japan started allowing pilots to report UAPs. Yeah, I think if anything, you know, if you've been looking into any of the recent stuff that has been going on with Congress and trying to get disclosure, you know, it seems like the newest development is that they've actually, you know, put out this system where people can anonymously report UFO sightings without fear of, you know, any repercussions from being a whistleblower, especially if you hold government positions. I think that's a big development. I think that will mean a lot more of these things get reported, you know, and that kind of goes along the lines of what I was talking about before, where, you know, some people go, well, why is all this stuff happening 50, 60, 70 years ago, but not really today? Well, you got to imagine, you know, we just had a guy say he was in the U.S. Air Force, you know, and he saw a UFO when he was stationed in New Mexico, and he saw a UFO himself, you know. And now my question to him would be, did you report it? Did you tell anybody about it? If you reported it, how did you report it? Did you report it to someone who was actually going to document the fact that you reported it and actually like make use of that document, or call, or not, right? So the takeaway here is the majority of people who see something almost never report it, because most people don't know how to report something like that. Who do you even report to? If you have researched UFOs at all, maybe you've heard of a government organization, not a non-government organization, civilian ran, called MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. MUFON is one of those things that's, I think, nonprofit, and it's basically they have like a hub in every major city around the US. I know Phoenix has one, and they put on like different speeches where you can come and watch like speakers talk. Like I went to one in Phoenix where Travis Walton was, and they interviewed him for 3 hours, and then people that got to go to a restaurant afterwards and hang out. And I even got to personally meet Travis Walton at this thing. So, but that's not a government funded program, and most people don't even know that exists. So, but as far as I know, that's the most reliable way to report something, where someone's going to look into what you reported, right? But the majority of people either don't know about it or don't think that the event is significant enough to report. So most of these sightings, maybe some of them are very compelling, never get reported. How crazy is that, right? I think Stanton Friedman, he's a guy who is a nuclear physicist, dedicated the second half of his life to investigating a lot of UFO sightings and reports. He passed away, unfortunately. I think he had a heart attack or something, but you know, he said himself he would do speeches and lectures at universities because he was like a nuclear physicist, and he would talk about UFOs, and he would say, by a show of hands, how many people in this room, in this lecture hall, have seen a UFO in their lifetime? And a number of people would raise their hand. Let's say out of 100, maybe 10 or 20 people would raise their hand. Then he would say, okay, how many of the people with your hands up actually reported that you saw what you saw? And then all the hands would go down except for maybe 1 out of 10. So he came to the conclusion through his own just like personal, I guess, surveys, about 10%, about 1 out of 10 people will actually report seeing something that they saw. I'll give you another example. And this is crazy to me. I personally have never seen a UFO. I've seen some freaky shit, which I've talked about on my YouTube channel. I've made a video where I've seen the Hat Man a number of times. That was a crazy experience. I've also had a couple of paranormal experiences that I can't explain. Not necessarily experiences that I would put into the category of UFO, because I've never seen a craft that was from another world that I couldn't explain. But that said, I think this was April. I was still working on the Martin Luther King conspiracy video, and I'd met 2 people within a 2-week period that month, where the topic of UFOs came up. Obviously, I have a YouTube channel about this stuff, so I'm interested in this topic. So I brought it up. I had 2 people, didn't know each other, independent, met them in separate instances, who told me adamantly, I've seen a craft. It was hovering right above my head, and it was like a metallic craft, like a physical thing, not just a light in the sky, right? And it was silent, all the things that you hear about UFO stories. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say neither one of those people reported it. And that really got me thinking. A lot of people have probably seen these things. And actually, since April, I've met one more person who said he's seen a UFO 3 times. And I was hanging out with this guy for like 2 weeks. And he was not someone who I would think would be making this up. And he was very serious when he was telling me about what he saw. And it really lines up with a lot of the stories that you hear about things being seen. So that's 3 people I've met this year who claim they've seen one at least multiple times, right? Now, that brings up another topic of discussion, is how trustworthy are these people? And this is something that really, talking about fucked with my head a little bit, because I thought to myself, okay, if I met 2 people in a 2-week period who didn't know each other, had no reason to be in the same circle as each other, and just different personalities from each other. And then I met another person a couple months ago who's also seen craft. And now we have another person here who's seen craft. Here's where I, with my knowledge of human nature, have to ask myself, okay, what are the chances, just the statistical chances, that if I have a series of 3 or 4 people who have seen a UFO, what are the chances that at least one of them are making up the story for whatever reason, right? And then I think, is it a higher % chance that they saw an intergalactic craft from another galaxy or another planet, who knows where it's from, or that they're lying? I personally think the chances are that are higher that they're lying. At least one of them is lying, right? But then I look at each individual case and I go, I'm not getting this vibe that they're lying. And I like to think of myself as someone who's pretty good at reading people, right? So it is kind of like a crazy thing to contemplate if you think about it, right? It's kind of a mind fuck if you think about it. And so I don't know. And that's why I think this stuff needs to be looked into a little bit more. I think the more people looking into it, the better. And I think the more transparency that we can get from the government, the better, because the government, if anybody, is going to have the best tools and resources to be able to look into these things. And you got to assume, based on everything that we know now about the UFO phenomenon, they have been looking into this for a very long time. And government whistleblowers are coming out and saying the same exact thing that they've been saying for decades, all these whistleblowers. We have programs that look into this. We have programs that cover this up. And there's something very strange and interplanetary and intergalactic or interdimensional to this phenomenon, right? And so, now we just got to get people in the government on the same page. And I think that's the tricky part, is it's so compartmentalized and there's already such a veil of secrecy that it's almost impossible to know until someone in the government is willing to fall on the sword, metaphorically, to be able to release or make known what the government knows. But you also got to think, and I actually saw this in Travis Walton interview recently. Travis Walton himself, the guy who was abducted by aliens, depending on if you believe his story, which at this point, if you've looked into it, I don't know why you wouldn't believe it. He says himself, he doesn't think that official disclosure with a capital D should happen, because there's probably a lot of just national defense things to take into consideration before releasing all the information you have on what you know about things in your aerospace and how you know it. I think there's obviously going to be debate about that too. Unfortunately, I think it's all going to come down to what Ronald Reagan said in a famous speech he gave at the United Nations in the 80s, which was he was kind of giving the thought of like, what would happen if we were invaded from people of other worlds. He believes that the world, our world, would come together and would finally see that we are not people with imaginary lines drawn between land, but we are one people of one planet. And he thinks it would actually unite everybody. But then that kind of brings into discussion Project Bluebeam, which, if you know anything about that, which if you don't, I wouldn't be surprised. So I'm not going to knock you for it. But Project Bluebeam is the government program that came through, and I'm not the most studied on this quite yet because I want to do a video on it eventually. But it's basically the government plans to stage a fake UFO invasion in order to gain more control. Now, if you want to think about more control, just look at what's happened in the last few years and think, okay, if there's some big thing affecting the world at large that most people have zero control over, well, now you have to input regulations to, I guess, keep control of whatever madness might ensue with the general public, which is you and I, right? So Project Bluebeam is an interesting topic. And it's really interesting to think about what would happen if this was officially confirmed. If the president got on national TV and just laid out everything he knew and said this is real, and said they're here, and said he's met with them or shook hands or whatever, what would happen, right? And I think at this point, the majority of experts who have any level of control like to refer back to what happened in 1938 during the War of the Worlds broadcast, which a lot of people thought was a real UFO invasion over the internet, or not the internet, the radio, but it was in fact a fictional story being read. But mass panic ensued, right? And so I think a lot of people, even in the government, who want this information to come out are fearful of what are the immediate after effects of that happening. Would there be mass panic? I'm going to go out on a limb and try to just interpolate what might happen, but I'm going to guess that if official disclosure with a capital D happened, and everything that we've been talking about was confirmed, then I believe there would be a period of mass panic. I mean, imagine all the people who dedicate their lives to one religious text and think that is the end all be all of truth, and they take every word literally, right? People like that who have very strong religious beliefs would start to question their religious beliefs, because they might think we are so unique in God's eyes that we are the only intelligent beings in the universe. And I think naturally people would panic. And I also think a lot of people, maybe lower IQ people, would be like, we're going to go out with our fat dip in our mouth and a shotgun, and we're going to blow these motherfuckers to hell and make sure they go back to their own planet, wherever they came from. You're going to have people like that too. But I think in the long term, it would be good. I think in the long term, we would figure it out. We would settle down. We would unite as a people. And I think ultimately it would be good for society. Now, here's the question. What's going to happen first? Official disclosure by the government, or some type of undeniable event where you cannot deny that that is an alien being inside of an alien spaceship in the sky, and they are here and we have no control over it. That could very well happen first, right? So I guess we'll find out, right? Alan Hayes, totally willing to share. Alan, I'm trying to figure out, would it be best for you to just kind of give us a little overview and a comment? That might be easiest. Other than that, I'm not sure how it would be easiest to share with you, unless you like emailed me and I could send you a link to come on here and join us if you're interested while we're live. Maybe you could talk about your experience. That would be cool too. The email should be somewhere on my YouTube channel. If you go like to the main page of my YouTube channel, look up my email address. You could email me. That way I have your email and I'll shoot you a link to join us live if you're interested. If not, totally understandable. Probably the next easiest thing would be to just comment kind of a little bit about what you saw and what your experience was. And I'm also curious to know if you reported it. Christopher Finch. Hey man, love the Men in Black, the Man in Black Hat episode. Have you watched Otherworld's podcast? They have a great episode on it. No, I actually haven't seen or heard of that podcast, but I'll have to check it out. Here's the thing that really fascinates me about the Hat Man phenomenon. I personally, after experiencing it, think it's interdimensional. I don't necessarily think it's demonic or anything like that. But what fascinated me most is this happened to me in my teen years, and not like preteen, like 12, 13, but I'm talking like 15, 16, 17, 18. It was a continuous phenomenon that I was experiencing up until my senior year of high school. And I thought I was crazy for even going through this. And I had told many people after this all happened what my experience was, feeling like a crazy person. Okay. But then years later, like I said in the video, is when I saw, not only had I seen it, but other people have seen it, and they didn't see something similar. They saw the exact thing that I saw, and their experience was the exact experience that I had. That is what's most compelling to me. And another thing that's even more compelling about it is there are so many people, especially as of today, 2023, talking about it now, right? And so when I was going through this there wasn't a documentary out, there wasn't podcasts out about it, but now there is, which means there's got to be something to the phenomenon. I've now personally met at least 2 or 3 other people who've also seen the Hat Man. If you've seen it, I'd be curious to hear about it. I've also met another person who said their friend would see it every time they took a lot of Benadryl, which I don't recommend, but maybe there's something to that. I have zero clue, but either way, it scares me. To this day, I question if I'm going to see it when I go into a dark room or I turn out the lights at night, because it was such a traumatizing experience that happened to me consistently over and over again over the course of like 3 years. Okay. So I haven't seen it since my senior year of high school. I don't even live in the same house anymore. But something that blows my mind, metaphorical mind fuck. All right. I just saw Encounters on Netflix and never knew about the incident at the Welsh school in the 70s. Remind me, what is the Welsh school experience? Is that the one with the kids in Africa where they saw a UFO land and the kids talked to the beings and the beings communicated with them telepathically? Is that the same one that I'm thinking about? If not, let me know what the Welsh experience was. What's up, the Drama Llama? I've seen a few craft most recently while watching the ISS feed. Whoa, what did the craft look like? And was that like a live stream? You said it was a feed, so I'm assuming it was a live stream. Did the live stream get cut off as soon as the craft appeared? I'd be curious to know that, because I know that's been a thing in the past. If you go back and watch my first ever video I posted, I show a few of those ISS live streams, the NASA live streams, where something zipped across the screen or changed directions and flew off in another direction that's unexplainable. And immediately after it happened, NASA cut the feed, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if that happened after you saw that. And if you saw something and the feed was cut immediately after, that would be interesting evidence to think about. Circumstantial evidence. I guess it depends on what you would classify as solid evidence. I would consider it circumstantial. Have you seen a UFO yourself? I have not seen a UFO, unfortunately. What's the Hat Man and when did you see it? Ed on Instagram asks. So the Hat Man is a shadow figure that has a trench coat. The Hat Man is a shadow figure that has a trench coat and a top hat, and when it presents itself, usually the person who's in the room will get this deep feeling of fear, dread, and anxiety while it's there. And you can only see it when all the lights are off, including, electrical devices. So like when I was experiencing it, the only device I had in my room at the time was a television. So every time I would turn off the television, I would see this outline of this big shadow figure with a very clear outline of a trench coat and a top hat just standing there in my window, which is like 20 feet off the ground, with the shadows of the trees waving behind it. And that's crazy because I could see the clear, sharp edges of the outline of this Hat Man. And it was not moving. It was just standing there. And I felt this deep sense of fear and dread while it was there. Now, the story is relatively long. I've made a full video of the full story, including actual pictures of the house and the room and when the experience started and what happened and how it ended my senior year, because it kind of did end on a climax, if you will, where I, in a way, tried to confront this thing. And I think when you show that you're no longer in fear of it, it no longer presents itself to you. And, ever since then, I've not seen it, but I still think twice every time I turn out the lights. So, if you guys have ever heard of Sam and Colby, I met them like last year. I showed them a picture of the Hat Man that I saw. Here's the other crazy thing. Every other person who's experienced it, if you Google the Hat Man, you'll see a bunch of like illustrations of what the Hat Man might look like. But there's one in particular that is the exact shadow, exactly the same proportions, everything that I saw. And that picture is shown in the documentary. That picture is shown on Google Images, if you know what image it is. And everybody who's seen it has seen the exact shadow. Okay. So when I showed it to Sam and Colby, they told me that was the same shadow man that Corey Shear used to see. And if you've been following Sam and Colby for years, I've been following them for quite a while. Corey Shear used to be in a lot of their videos. Now he does the TFIL and overnight videos with Elton Cassie. But he's always talked about being terrorized by this shadow man in his bedroom at night. And he would see this shadow man sometimes when they would go to these haunted locations. Sam and Colby told me that was the exact same shadow that Corey Shear was seeing. So again, another element of strangeness to that, right? Ed said, I was in a car crash 2 years ago, got PTSD, and since then I've had crazy sleep paralysis experiences. Now, here's the crazy part about this. I was not asleep when this was happening. I could move. I could turn on and off the lights. I could speak. And so that's where, when I look into people talking about shadow figures or the Hat Man, I want to know, were you asleep or not? were you having sleep paralysis or not? Because I've had hallucinations on sleep paralysis a lot. In fact, the other night I got sleep paralysis and I was like shit my pants a little bit, right? Because it's a scary experience to get sleep paralysis. But the other night when I had sleep paralysis, I didn't hallucinate anything, but I've had sleep paralysis experiences where I saw shadow figures and whatnot. And I think it's debatable that if you're in sleep paralysis, it could be hallucinations. But what's more compelling to me is people who experience it when they're not asleep, like I wasn't sleeping. Okay. Stephen Chin, love your channel, man. Thank you. I love it too. I just got a new editor. He edited the last video. That was the first one that he edited. So if you guys liked it, let me know. We're going to continue this thing, but me now having an editor means that I can post more consistently. We're already in the process of editing the next video. Whereas before I had an editor, I would write the script, I would film it, I would take a week or two to edit it, and then I would be so burnt out that I would have to take a week or two off before I even started researching the next video. So now that we have an editor, someone other than me who can edit these videos, that gives us the ability to start really prioritizing more consistent videos coming out. So look for another video in the next couple weeks, and then another week or two after that, look for the next video, so on and so forth. But glad you love the channel. I'm glad you're here early. And hopefully you stick around long enough for us to hit 10 million subscribers. I'm just going to put this in the universe now. That is my goal. I want 10 million subscribers on YouTube. I'm putting that in the universe. I'm manifesting it. But, you know, without you guys knowing too much about my own past before I even started this YouTube channel, I mean, one of those like lifelong bucket list creative goals that I've always had for myself was I want to be a big YouTuber. It's just always been a goal of mine ever since YouTube came out in 2004, 2005. And I was watching Kev Jumba when I was in high school. Right. And it was something that I always resisted personally going all in on until I started this channel. And so in the last few months, my mindset is like, fuck any other things that I'm doing to make money, my other careers or whatever. I'm all in on making this YouTube channel my number one thing, my number one priority, and my number one goal in life right now. So glad you're here early, man. Rob Jones, UFO cave paintings, India, Australia, Italy, can't all be lying. Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because so many people think, I get comments like this all the time on TikTok. Well, why is it that these things only happen in the United States? Well, to me, it's very obvious that those people just haven't been looking into this long enough, because this stuff has been happening all over the world for thousands of years. Okay. So it's not just the United States in the last few decades. So good comment. Roman, I'm back. Sorry about that. Thank you for coming back, man. I'm glad you got your sub. I'm glad, hopefully your girl's doing great. Roman, dude, keep up the good work and your life will only get better. Great videos. I'm praying and hoping. I'm praying and hoping. I want this studio right here to not be the fanciest studio I've ever had or ever will have. Let's just say that. Rob, haven't seen the Hat Man, only shadow people since I was 7. They just observe. Good point, man. Ed said, although I feel spiritual, I think it's to do with anxiety in the brain creating certain menacing figures, you know. I get it, Ed. I get it. And that's again why I think it's more compelling if you're not in a state of sleep paralysis when you see some of these things. Damn, I was playing Hunt Showdown and I got the notification. Hunt Showdown. What is that? Is that like Raid Shadow Legends? Drama Llama on 3 separate occasions. Def got to start this from the beginning. Yeah, we've been going for an hour already. Yeah, man, we've been talking about a lot since we started. Sorry for the late replies. Multitasking at the moment. Makes sense. What questions do you guys have for me? What conspiracies should I look into that maybe I haven't covered yet on this channel or on my YouTube channel if you're on Instagram or TikTok? What conspiracies have you guys been diving deeper into that are interesting to you guys? I will say one right now that I've been looking into the last few weeks is Travis Walton. Hint, hint, wink, wink. at what videos might be coming out in the future. But the Travis Walton one really fascinates me. I'll even say this. I was watching Travis Walton's documentary the other night, and now that I'm refreshing myself on the story and trying to put myself in the shoes of the guy who experienced this, man, what a crazy experience. Not just crazy, but fucking freaky as hell, man. When I was watching that documentary, it was like a horror film when I imagined in real time what was going on. Like, just put yourself in the shoes of, you're on the job, you're working in the forest with a group of six other dudes. You guys are cutting down trees all day. You're driving out of the forest at night. You see a light coming through the trees. You go to investigate what's the source of this light deep inside the forest where you've been cutting down trees all day. And you see this flying saucer just hovering right above the ground. And then obviously Travis Walton runs out to the ship, gets zapped by this electrical field that's around it, probably killed by it. Then his friends flee the scene in fear, come back thinking they got to get Travis's body in case he's still alive. Because if he was alive and the blast didn't kill him, then he definitely wouldn't survive the night, because at that part of the forest, it just gets too cold at night. He would have gotten hypothermia. But when they go back a few minutes later, Travis's body is gone, and also the ship is gone, or the craft is gone. He's missing for 5 days. And in the meantime, the entire town that these guys are from are suspecting these 6 dudes of murdering Travis and dumping his body somewhere. So there's an active murder investigation. They're looking for Travis's body with a bunch of search parties. Nowhere to be found. No footprints, nothing. And basically, 5 days later, Travis Walton appears in the middle of the night and is like, calls his brother on a payphone, is like, hey man, you got to come pick me up. He has 5 days of beard growth. He's lost 12 pounds and basically recalls being on this ship, meeting and seeing other beings which were working on him somehow. In retrospect, he believes that they were healing him with whatever this blast from outside the ship did. That way they could drop him back off and no damage done. But after that, it's very compelling, because now what became a murder investigation, what started as a murder investigation, turns into, are these guys hoaxing, seeing a UFO? And when you look at all the evidence around that and the experience that Travis went through, the only logical conclusion is that it happened as they're telling the story, exactly as they recalled the events. And what's crazy about it is, I mentioned earlier in the stream, I actually met Travis Walton here in Phoenix at a restaurant after a MUFON meeting where he had been speaking all day. And, you know, he's in his 70s, probably edging closer to his 80s right now. And, you know, after 3 hours of talking about it on stage, he was probably very tired. I think anybody who speaks for 3 hours would be tired. But we all went to a restaurant afterwards. I was standing next to him in line, and I asked him something about the experience, or maybe his experience afterwards. I don't remember the exact question I asked, but he just looked at me dead in the eye, 2 feet away from me. I could tell his eyes were bloodshot. He was exhausted. And he just plainly and simply said to me, man, I kind of just wish this whole thing never happened to me. Now, when I heard that, it told me that this is a guy who didn't want this drama of being abducted by UFOs. He wanted it not to happen to him, right? And so I believe the guy. I believe what happened to him happened. I believe there are craft from other worlds. I think with the amount of stories that I've posted already about this stuff, the evidence, the leaked documents, the whistleblowers, the people who have come out with their stories, the 15 plus polygraph tests that were done on not only Travis Walton, but also the 6 other crew members who witnessed this thing go down, and they all passed with flying colors. I think it happened. I mean, how could you explain otherwise? Now, if I was someone who had never experienced something that was paranormal ever in my life, I would probably question it a lot more than I do. But I know for a fact through my own experiences, I've never seen a UFO, but I've seen some paranormal things. I know that there's more to this reality than meets the eye. And if you take mushrooms or a psychedelic of some sort in a large dose, you'll probably come to the same conclusion. And that tells me that even though I've never seen a UFO, I'm open to the possibility of it being real. And who am I? Some guy who was born 30, 40 years after the fact. Who am I to call Travis Walton a liar? Because I wasn't there. I didn't interview him at the time. I wasn't investigating on the scene. Who am I to call him a liar? Right? With the things that I've personally experienced. So that's just kind of my stance on that. Hunt Showdown is a hardcore player versus environment extractor shooting. It's amazing. That sounds like an ad read for Hunt Showdown. It's a hardcore game, player versus player, you versus them. Anyways, sounds like a fun game. Dumbs, deep underground military bases, interesting topic. I agree. I want to do a video on the one in Dulce, New Mexico. But I gotta look into it a little bit more so I can find an angle, a story arc to make a compelling story and video out of it. But I agree, man. There's something very compelling about it. But also there's probably a lot more of those than we realize. Like the famous one, if you've looked into those, is the Dulce, New Mexico base, where supposedly this guy Rob Schneider, who came, who was a whistleblower and was suicided, he claimed he came out with a lot of information about the Dulce, New Mexico one in particular. I've heard there's another one in Mount Shasta, and also the Denver Military Airport. If you look into that one, not Denver International Airport, seems like there's a lot of deep underground tunnels under that one. I would assume from the people who have been whistleblowers around Area 51 that Area 51 is a deep underground military base as well. Because if you just like look up Area 51 on Google Earth, you'll find it. I mean, it's there, right? However, it looks like a couple of buildings and maybe a couple of runways at best, right? So a lot of the stuff there going on, you got to assume is deep underground, and there's probably levels and levels and levels and levels and levels of underground military base there. As with probably in a lot of different places. Another one that's a deep underground military base, which I have covered on this channel. Go watch the video about the Stranger Things, the real story behind Stranger Things. Because that one, that whole story revolves around a military base in, I think it's New York. If it's not New York, it's definitely one of those northeastern states. I forget the name of the base. The name of the base escapes me, but the whole story revolves around that military base, which if you look into the story, not only connects to the Philadelphia experiment, which is one of those angles that I intentionally chose to leave out of that video because it would have made the video another 20 to 30 minutes, right? The Philadelphia experiment definitely deserves its own video. But that story actually talks about how that military base has levels and levels and levels underneath it, where a lot of strange things occur. One of the strange things that occurred there is an actual fully intact flying saucer just materialized into a room somewhere like 10 levels below ground in this deep underground military base, and it just sat there. Another thing that mysteriously appeared in the base was $10 billion worth of gold that was stolen from a Nazi train after, like, towards the end of World War II, that just went missing out of nowhere. Apparently that appeared underground at this base and was used to like fund a lot of the research projects going on at this base, as well as all the crazy shit that happened with the true story behind Stranger Things at that base. And after I released that video, okay, it's called Montauk, the Montauk Project. I don't remember if it's also the name of the base, Montauk, but I know it's called the Montauk Project. So someone who lives in that area, in the town, it might be a town called Montauk, but he actually messaged me privately on Twitter, told me he grew up in the area, and if you live there, then it's definitely a known thing that crazy shit happens at that base. So another thing that's like circumstantial. Also, a crazy thing about that same town is, you know, it's kind of near the shore. So one thing about that town that's a little bit crazy is a lot of like weird animals will wash up on shore, like dead animals. And when I say weird, you know how like the platypus is weird because it's like a sea otter, a beaver, a duck, like all in one. Well, and a sloth or whatever, a platypus is. Well, imagine that, but like other variations of other animals just washing up on shore, right? And so that's like another one of those like high strangeness things that happens in that town. Franken cover up with Johnny Gosh. Don't know what that means. I think you're speaking another language. I was closed-minded until a few things happened. I've always been curious, seen a few weird things that drove my curiosity more to maybe it's true. Yeah. Let's see. How funny would it be if I just stayed live on TikTok? Thank you for the ice cream. Thank you for the ice cream. Thank you for the ice cream. Have you tried CE5 meditation? I have, and I've had one very unique contact experience afterwards that I'm open to sharing with you. I'll find your email. Yeah, man, I would love to hear about your experience. Let me see. I'm going to open my email right now. If you email me, I can shoot you a link to join us live. If not, no worries. Maybe we can do it on the next video. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to plan on doing this every time I release a video in the future, whether that's a week or 2 weeks between the videos. I think right now that I have an editor working with me, we can start to plan on more consistent upload dates. But in the meantime, it's whenever the video is done, it gets posted. But regardless, my plan is to go live every time a new video comes out. That way I can engage with you guys, answer questions, and maybe even bring some of you guys on here live, so we can talk about your experiences if you've had them. That would be something I would really look forward to doing. But to answer your question, I've not tried CE5 meditation. I've heard a lot of conflicting things about Stephen Greer. I actually think I saw you mention Stephen Greer in a different comment today. But CE5, if you are watching this and you don't know what that is, close encounter of the fifth kind. It's not an official classification like what J. Allen Hynek came up with, but it's something that Stephen Greer, who is a very for-profit guy, has coined as his own. He calls it a close encounter of the fifth kind, which he means you can through deep meditative practices call out to these ships and they will come and present themselves to you. Again, I've heard conflicting things about these things. I've never done it myself, so I can't speak to if it's legit or not. But I would be very curious to hear your experience. I'll be honest, man. When I think about UFO experiences, the ones that don't really fascinate me as much are the ones where it's just a light in the sky, because a light in the sky could be anything. I think what would make me more interested is something like a physical craft being seen. If you see a physical craft, that's undeniable, especially if it's acting in ways that you cannot explain, like hovering silently in place. Like if you think about crafts that we have that we know about that can hover in place, helicopters, but those things are very, very loud. I'm telling you, because I've had helicopters hovering over my house a couple of times just because of the area that we live in. And those things are so loud that they vibrate the house. And unfortunately, when they hover, they might be hovering for quite a while. And that is kind of annoying, especially if it's in the middle of the night. Just saying. I used to live in downtown Phoenix in the city, and shit like that would happen all the time, right? Even if you see something that's crazy, like one of those stealth bombers that we have. I've been to several football games, NFL football games, where the stealth bombers flew in formation over the top as they sang the national anthem. Very cool experience, but again, very extremely, extremely loud. All right. So if it's hovering silently in place, if it zips off at light speed or near light speed, something you can't explain, right? So if I did a CE5 experience and I saw a mysterious light, I don't know that I would claim that to be alien craft from another planet right off the rip. You know, I would try to do some more investigation before I came to that conclusion. But if I also think about it, And this is something that I have thought about myself. On a scale of 0 to 100%, how firmly do I believe that aliens are here in craft from other dimensions or other planets? How firmly do I believe that on a scale of 0 to 100%? I would say in the high 90s, probably 99%, right? And I say 99% because I have to maintain that healthy level of 1% skepticism just in case. And I think the only thing that would convince me 100% is I would have to not only see a craft, but I would also have to see a being with the craft. If I saw a being, to me, that would be undeniable confirmation that it's not just some secret technology that may or may not be man-made, but it's also some crazy ass technology that's definitely from a non-human origin. That's the only thing that would convince me. But up until then, I have a healthy 1% level of skepticism. All right. Stephen Chin. I have, oh, he's talking to Stephen Chin. I have, but I didn't expect what happened after I opened that channel. Not quite sure what you're referring to there. Are we talking about MK Ultra? I mean, MK Ultra, that word gets thrown around a lot for a lot of different conspiracies. It gets thrown around with the Montauk Project. It gets thrown around with the Marilyn Manson cult murders. It gets thrown around with LSD being given to people. So there may or may not be a MK Ultra element to a lot of different stories. Girlfriend and I saw something weird at night at a beach, on a beach. We saw a tall person-like thing in the water, and I ran towards it to get better look at it, and it ducked down and swam out to sea. Wow. That seems crazy. It's like almost Slender Man. Like, my girlfriend personally is obsessed with mermaids. I don't necessarily think that she believes in mermaids, but she just likes mermaids. So if she heard that, she would go, "Oh my God, you saw a mermaid. How cool." No, look up the Franklin cover up with Johnny Grosh. I'm going to write that one down. All right. Franklin cover up with Johnny Grosh. What, can you give me more details about what that is? I'd be interested to hear your 1 to 2 sentence summary of what that even is. I started looking into mermaids on a Joe Rogan episode with Tony Woods, and he spoke about seeing one as well. Okay. I vaguely remember on a recent episode of Joe Rogan, some guy talking about seeing a mermaid. I don't know that it fully convinced me in mermaids, but what would you even classify a mermaid as being, right? And I think that's something to look at, to think about as well. Like, is a mermaid just a humanoid creature in the ocean? Okay, sure, maybe there's mermaids, but what if a mermaid is really an underground civilization of aliens from another planet who came, and now they are just kind of building, they have their own little hub underwater. Now they would be maybe humanoid creatures in the ocean. Would that also be classified as mermaids? And also, I think if you want to give it the label mermaid, what's the origin of a mermaid, right? They don't cover this in The Little Mermaid from Disney, but where did the mermaids come from? Are they a mythical creature that was evolved into on Earth, or is it something that came here? I think that's a deeper question. Like, what would you classify as a mermaid? This is also my own personal gripe with the topic of Bigfoot. I don't know that I believe in Bigfoot. And even if I did believe in Bigfoot, how much do I care? I'll be honest, I don't care. Because I want to know, what do you classify as Bigfoot? Is it a humanoid ape-looking thing in nature? Okay, great. If that's the case, then I would say if Bigfoot were discovered and confirmed to be real, then I would go, okay, cool. We just discovered a new species of ape in the wild. To me, that's not as compelling as aliens from another planet. To me, that's as compelling as finding a new species of ape in the wild and nothing more. And that's my own personal gripe with the whole Bigfoot phenomenon, but I don't know. That's just me personally. Same thing with the whole mermaid topic, right? Now I have heard, or I know there's like resources on the internet. There's at least one documentary on Amazon Prime where they attempt to make a connection between alien sightings or UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings. I know that's a big correlation on Skinwalker Ranch, but the documentary kind of sucked, if I'm being honest. It didn't do a good job of convincing me that Bigfoot are real. It didn't do a good job of drawing the connection between UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings. And to me, Bigfoot, the phenomenon, might as well just be another species of ape in the wild. That's just how I personally feel. Again, mermaids on cave paintings tell a story. Interesting. My dad swears he saw some weird UFO in the sky. He described it as being 25 feet long and shaped like a big pair of pants. I can kind of imagine that, actually. That's interesting. You know what's crazy is in my conversation with Richard Dolan, which the full thing is actually posted on my YouTube channel, I told him that I realized I think my dad had an experience as well. Now, the thing that's interesting about my dad, who is deceased at this point, but while he was alive, I asked him once on a road trip when we were just sitting in a car and I was bored at night, "Hey Dad, have you ever seen a UFO?" And he told me, straight face, he said, "Yes." I said, "What was it?" Now, before I tell you this story, I need to tell you that my dad was a Vietnam veteran. He did 3 tours in Vietnam, and he was a helicopter pilot. And he retired when I was born as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. So as far as whistleblower accounts, you could consider him a highly credible whistleblower because he was a lieutenant colonel in the Army who was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So given that was his background, the thing about him is anytime I had an experience I couldn't explain, he was the type of guy who was adamant that paranormal things do not exist. Ghosts don't exist. Demons don't exist. Shadow figures don't exist. Anything like that, he always assumed there was a logical explanation, even if it wasn't obvious to the eye. Okay. So when he told me that he had seen a UFO, I didn't know if he was being truthful or not, because he was not the type of guy who would openly say that he's seen something that was from another planet. So here's his story. He told me that with his first wife, which was before he was married to my mother, he said that they were in Kansas, driving to her parents' house to go over there for dinner. While they were driving there, broad daylight, him and her both saw a flying saucer hovering over a tree off in the distance, right off the road that they were driving down. And he said that he pointed it out. They both acknowledged it. They both went, "Holy crap, that's a UFO. That's crazy." Then he said when they got to her parents' house, he brought it up to her parents and she had no memory of it. Only he did. That's crazy. Now, that's the only story that he told me. Now, years later, when he was essentially on his deathbed, he died of cancer. It's been speculated that he might have gotten cancer at a relatively young age. He was in his 60s, simply because of something called Agent Orange, which was a thing in Vietnam, which they used to kill the trees so you could get a better view of from the air of like the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. Agent Orange just killed all these trees. Well, years later, there was a big lawsuit with all these veterans where Agent Orange gave all these people cancer. So him dying of cancer may or may not have been a consequence of Agent Orange. But when he was dying of aggressive cancer, I asked him, "Hey, Dad, were you being truthful when you told me that story of a flying saucer?" And he said, "Yes." So now, when I told Richard Dolan this, bringing this full circle on that full conversation, I had realized after I thought about it, there was one moment that as a kid, you probably had many experiences like this with your parents, but I didn't think about it much until like maybe a year or two ago, where my dad had gone to bed early. It was like 9 p.m. at night. I walk into his bedroom and I flip on the lights, not knowing he's in there sleeping. And when I flip on the lights, he starts screaming in his sleep. I've never seen a man so afraid of lights. Anyways, I like calm him down. I'm like, well, hold on. What's going on? What's going on? Are you okay? And he woke up and he told me that when I turn on the lights, he was dreaming about being examined under a bright light by aliens on a spacecraft. Holy crap. Now that opens a whole can of worms. Was it just a dream, or was it a suppressed memory from his encounter with a potential flying saucer? I have no idea. I'm just speculating. It could be an unrelated instance, and it could be just a dream that he was having. But if a former Vietnam vet, helicopter pilot, lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, who is adamant that there is nothing paranormal that exists, and the only thing that he claims that may fit into that realm that happened to him was seeing a flying saucer that his wife, who saw it with him, has no memory of seeing, maybe there's some missing time there. Maybe there's some repressed memories there. And maybe that's why he had such a visceral reaction to me flipping on the lights while he was in a deep sleep. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but crazy, crazy stuff. I have a subscription to Gaia, and there are some very interesting videos. I believe that, or I agree with that. I have seen some Gaia programs. I'll admit that Gaia really opened my eyes to a lot more of the fringe theories, which sometimes the fringe theories is just another phrase for deeper down the rabbit hole than maybe would be on the surface on like a YouTube or something. But I've gone through my ups and downs with Gaia. Here's why. The first time I bought a subscription to this years ago, I canceled after a couple of nights because I was watching this guy named John Lear giving an interview. Now, John Lear is a guy who, if you know anything about the Bob Lazar story, John Lear was like the guy who Bob Lazar was like, hey, I've been working at Area 51. Here's my experience. I'll even take you out to see these things because they do test flights on every Wednesday. And then eventually Bob Lazar's story comes to a head when he takes John Lear and I think John's wife out, and they see this flying saucer zipping around the sky during one of the tests of this flying saucer on a Wednesday night, exactly at the time that Bob Lazar said. They got home video footage of it. John Lear was that guy. But in this interview that he was doing on Gaia, he had some crazy theories about the moon that were so crazy that I was like, this is bullshit. Fuck this. I'm canceling Gaia. I'll just say that. Now that I've looked deeper into it and I've seen other people saying similar stuff to him saying it, of what he was saying, and I've also looked more into the moon, which is one of my more popular videos across the internet, especially on TikTok and Instagram, but not necessarily on YouTube. YouTube, I think it has like 90K views, but on TikTok, that video about the moon did like 10, 11 million views. And on Instagram, I think it did like maybe 2 or 3, maybe actually like 4 million views on Instagram. So when I was researching that, I was like, okay, if I go as deep as I possibly can and believe every detail about where this rabbit hole is going, then I could start to see maybe John Lear has a point. But just in a nutshell, from my memory, what John Lear was saying that made me almost offended that I paid to watch this was he was saying that the moon has a supercomputer inside. The moon is an artificial satellite. And when you die, your soul gets sucked into the center of the moon, where apparently it gets manipulated by whatever built the moon. But he claims that your soul just basically gets sucked into the moon, like stuff like that. And I'm like, this motherfucker's making shit up for clicks and content or whatever. And so I canceled Gaia. But like I said, I've had my ups and downs with Gaia. That was my first impression of Gaia. I've since had more. I'm not an active subscriber of them now, but I have been multiple times since then in the past, and I've seen a lot of good stuff on there, specifically revolving around things like the Sphinx, the pyramids, leaked documents. Richard Dolan, who I have done a conversation with, has his own program on there, I believe. So yeah, definitely a lot of good stuff on there. The government and senators were Nama human. Oh, got it. Well, in that case, as much as I would love to create a video about it, especially I'm going to look into it, but especially after looking into it, I don't know that I could post that without what happening. All right. Crazy that you don't have more subscriber views with the quality of these videos. It's amazing. Love your content. I live in Finland, and we've only had one UFO case in the 60s where Finnish fighter pilot chased a UFO. Interesting, man. So again, evidence that this happens in countries outside of the US. But secondly, there are many reported instances that you could even find on CIA.gov documents that are released through the Freedom of Information Act, where U.S. pilots were chasing down flying saucers. In fact, I have some of those documents handy right here. Let me grab them. All right, so I got all these documents that I've printed off that I found literally on CIA.gov, okay? And I read through them all. It took me a while. I'll be honest, I didn't find enough correlating stuff where I thought I could make a full video out of these documents specifically, but one of the documents does outline the entire instance where a U.S. pilot chased down a flying UFO, and as he got close to this thing, something happened that caused him to crash and burn, and it cost this pilot his life. And that was documented in these documents that you can find literally on CIA.gov. All right. So if that doesn't tell you there's something to this that even the government may or may not be interested in, I don't know what would convince you of that. Sasquatch. Mermaids, from my research, are similar to sirens, luring sailors to their demise. When you say sirens, boy, do I have a story for you. I don't know that I would classify this as paranormal, but I would classify it as almost paranormal. Very strange. I made a podcast about this years ago on a very different channel under a very different context, but it was the time I almost slept with a succubus. And this is a woman who I met out at a bar who I believe was a full-blown succubus after my experience almost banging this chick. And so when I think of sirens, I almost think of the same line as succubus. And I believe after that experience that succubus are real. Now, I don't know much about the lore about succubi, but as far as mythical type of strange person / being that may or may not suck life energy from men that they have intercourse with, I believe I dodged a bullet. Pori's 7 balloons is a Finnish UFO case from 1969. The mystery of the 7 ball-shaped objects observed in the case is still unsolved. On April 12th, 1969, 7 yellow ball-shaped objects were, I'm assuming you were about to say were seen or spotted. I'm going to write that down. Finnish UFO case from 1969. 7 ball-shaped objects. April 12th, 1969. Boom. Documented. I will look into it. All right. The Franklin cover-up of that is okay. Yeah, I definitely could not make a YouTube video about that. But very compelling. I'll just say that. Moon structures, the drama llama. Space Nazis. Yeah, I mean, if you look back at my video that I made about, it's literally called Are There N-Word with Flying Saucers in Antarctica, where they fled to potentially after World War II. I believe that the further down that rabbit hole you go, it leads to the conclusion that that group of people from Germany in World War II fled to Antarctica with flying saucers that they built and made bases on the moon, and then used the moon as a midpoint or a stepping stone to get to Mars, which now they have bases on Mars, which they use to create what's known as a secret space program or secret space force, and where they kind of like do space missions and stuff. So when you say that, you may not have been joking, but I think there's something to that. I'm gonna write that down because I want to do a video on that soon. Secret space program. Yes, love it. Drama Llama, I'm late watching this. I have screenshots and I can email. This thing would have been massive and had what looks like flares on its corners. Whoa. If you have a picture of something, definitely send that to me. I would love to take a look. The pilot's name was Tom Mantle. Are you referring to the pilot that I was just talking about that crashed after chasing a UFO? If so, yes. Specifically 39 minutes behind. Hey, video guy, what is your first name? My first name, Patrick James, brother. It's in the title of of the channel. Anyways, guys, I've enjoyed hanging out with you guys. I could talk about this for hours. You have no idea. But looking forward to more content coming very soon. We're already actively editing the next video. If you're on another social media platform and you have not yet seen the video that we released last night, go over to the YouTube channel. Link is in the description. Check it out. If you're on YouTube, thank you for subscribing. I'm glad you guys are here at the beginning of this journey. We are just beginning, and we're going to start doing more of these live streams after we post a video. So we'll talk to you guys in a few weeks. Until then, see you guys next time.